Hello everyone, how are you? I'm Megalithic, and today here I am to talk about a subject concerning traditional folk magic, something I don't think I should bring into my White Wand series. As such, it stays as a different video, but may be important to some of you nonetheless. At least I hope so. I intend to speak of certain subjects like this as a sort of specific bits of information that may aid you in your magical endeavors within traditional folk magic without having to bring them into the White Wand series, because those series and my approach in those videos is something different, and it's more of advice rather than specific ways and works of witchcraft. Well, let's delve into the subject right away. Let's talk about stones. Certainly, we have all at some point come across the use of stones that seem to have an important role within the practice of witchcraft, often using specific stones without knowing exactly why, but it is always a type of information that goes from person to person, right? But also sometimes we don't even include stones in our practices or in our craft because precisely it doesn't make much sense, since most of the objects we use are either natural elements of which we have a certain specific perception that they constitute something alive or that have already been alive at some point, or because there really is no specific knowledge about why stones are included in witchcraft. And I think this also has a lot to do with moving away from an animistic thinking, unfortunately. As has been said here many times before, not all stones are alive, but some are. It's a question of perception and the way we interact with things. But let's not go there, as this has already been talked about many times in this channel. Well, the function of stones in witchcraft or otherwise, the place they have in there, for the reasons previously mentioned, is a place that is honestly less explored by many of us, but also because many stones being much more accessible only to those who have the money to buy certain stones. And so many of us have the tendency to not include stones because it's an expensive market, and it also brings about a whole set of environmental issues concerning the exploitation of habitats for a market that has quickly become another means of satisfying human consumerism in a society absolutely saturated by capitalism. In my view, in my understanding, the beauty and magic of things is not only in the simple things in life, but also in the emotional charge and meaning that we put into things. Anything can be a magical object, a charm, a talisman, as was said previously in the video about talismans in animism. It's the feeling we put into things, what makes sense to us, and all the emotional, sentimental charge and the importance that something has for us. I think that many of you share this same understanding, right? And I think it is a very common understanding in witchcraft itself as well, as many end up using stones that are easily accessible, such as simply visiting a lake or a river, or even going into the beach and taking a small stone that has some importance to us, primarily visually, of course, but it also makes sense at the moment to do something with that stone. Besides, historically speaking, witchcraft is traditional folk magic, the way of the people, a means of survival. To actively participate in life through certain pragmatic behaviors to enhance our chances of success and to attract benign forces that makes our everyday living, life itself and the world more bearable, less hard and more habitable. So we work with what we have, we make do, we go for the simplest things at hand. I understand that there is a range of detailed information about the power of each stone and its uses and values and whatnot, and I don't deny that. And anyone who can acquire various types of gemstones, I'm fine with that, no problem. I just think that a lot of times we simply trust and depend on information that has been stipulated for something. And we use things without even thinking about them. And we wait for results that are supposed to happen because that's how we were told, or that's how it was written or agreed upon. And this often deflects our gaze away from simpler things, ending up focusing on something that, in our understanding, the more beautiful, the more precious it is, the more agreed upon information it has, and more expensive it is, the better and more effective it will be. This is not the kind of feeling we see when dealing with traditional witchcraft. I don't know where people grew up and who they came in contact with in their lives, so just from my point of view in terms of life experience, of course, I grew up in a village where various traditional folk belief systems had still an extremely important and an important weight and influence in people's daily lives. And everything that was used was the simplest things we could acquire. And it had results. And there it is. It's the feelings, the emotions, all the emotional charge we give to things and our own will and intention. Not just things we can gather, but things we can make with our own hands, putting our emotions into them, expressing ourselves through them, and imbuing them with our own thought and spirit. And it is interesting to see that many natural objects, including stones, can be amulets, talismans, can have some special charm, stones of power, and have become popular traditions that have become rooted in our cultures. However, like almost everything in our modern world, it becomes an excuse to make money. And stones are now seen more as something beautiful to decorate the environment, or a plastic esotericism has been created around stones that fits perfectly into the system of capitalism in which we live in, where everything can be explored and transformed into money if we create an appealing narrative for the consumer. This is, in my opinion, of course, it is quite sad if we think about the animistic purpose of having some types of stones in our lives, in our homes. Of course, in a more basic understanding, they carry a sentimental charge of the place where they were, which brings us memories of these places and the moment lived in these places. So we carry a stone as a physical memory channel or memory conduit, which helps us remember certain feelings and experiences that give us meaning in life and fill us with emotions, with power, perpetuating memories whose internal energy helps us to do certain things in life and to carry on. On the other hand, stones have a spark of the local spirit from which they were collected or gathered. And we are not just talking about stones in natural environments here, right? But also stones from human environments, such as burial mounds, grave sites, which have a different charge of local spirit. I mean, it is no coincidence that the use of certain stones in traditional witchcraft are to cleanse and bless water from a well or a source, or any other source where we draw water from for consumption or for libations or other magical religious activities, or to pass the stones through smoke from the fireplace or from herbs, or even to keep a stone in the fireplace or other part of the house for protection, fertility, abundance, to ward off malevolent entities, etc. Notice this. From the moment we give an intention to a stone, it stops being merely a stone and becomes a magical object. We can have two identical stones, but one is magical and the other is not. The difference is that the magic stone is the one to which we attribute a specific function outside the normal existence of the stone and give it an intentional use beyond its function or beyond the functions the stone naturally has. The same applies to a spoon. A spoon can be a magical object. What is the difference between a normal spoon and a spoon that has become a talisman? Well, The normal spoon was made with a specific purpose, to aid in human nutrition. The talisman spoon was assigned to it a set of functions beyond the basic function for which it was created. The same applies to stones. There is an intention, new functions, emotional charges, a ritualization process that turns it into a magical stone, which can then be used for healing, protection, housing some energetic influence, be it natural force or spirit. And whether people believe this or not, the fact is that when we have the action of taking a stone or anything else and asking for permission, leaving something in return, carrying out cleaning by leaving the stone to soak in water from a place that we understand as being sacred or imbued with spirit, leaving it outside afterwards to be in contact with the nocturnal forces of the full moon, collecting it before sunrise, applying symbols, enchantment, prayer, intentions, etc. We are already building a unique relationship with this object that stops being a stone and becomes a magical object precisely by our actions. And it is this importance given to it that makes a stone become embedded with power. Then, of course, there is a large number of stones whose existence has some more supernatural understanding to them, such as the thunderstone, which is a stone in folk beliefs that is believed to have fallen from the heavens or was created by the strike of lightning, in which it would take 7 years for it to be visible in the surface. And it is believed that it has the power of keeping lightning away from the place where the stone is or where it is placed. But some people also attribute to it ways of harming a farmer, in which having this stone thrown on the roof of the house or of the barn is capable of being struck by lightning. I already talked very briefly about this here in some other videos, including in Scandinavian folklore when I've talked about Thor's hammer. Generally, we are mostly talking about stones that served as tools in the Stone Age, chipped stone and polished stone, which, due to the movement of the earth by the force of nature or human force, appear on the surface and were carried as talismans. Some were, of course, modified, reused for magical purposes, as amulets, charms, talismans, but also, of course, stones that are literally hit by lightning or have some unique configuration. They may resemble a particular animal or have an anthropomorphic form, or some mark that looks like a pattern or symbols. And these unusual circumstances, shapes and appearances are sufficient to understand such stones as imbued with something special, because they do not follow the average pattern of other stones in nature. And the same goes to unusual rock formations that can become important in traditional folk beliefs, and even, obviously, within animistic religions and belief systems and societies. Speaking of stones that have an unusual appearance, of course, it may have come to mind the witch's stone, a stone with a natural occurring hole through the center, believed to have protective qualities. The practice of hanging witches' stones or building them into walls to protect people against diseases, sendings, harmful charms, from evil in general, and even used to see through fairy and a witch's disguise. Well, European folklore says that the witch's stone keeps the hag spirit away and prevents witches from stealing away horses and children. But when you are already a hag, you got to protect yourself against other witches, other hags. Well, not every stone is used for beneficial things, that's the point. As here said many times before, how does one know how to cure if one doesn't know how to curse first? We have to know the disease in order to find a cure. We have to know how to poison, how poison works and how to poison in order to stop its effects. Well, some stones, particularly from places with a strong charge of pain and strong feelings of agony, suffering and mourning, are used for some act of maleficium, and being cursed, obviously. Hold stones, or witches' stones as it is popularly known, are widely used in protective charms to see spirits, for cures such as fever, sterility, skin problems and eye afflictions, and wish fulfillment as well. It is a stone collected from a watercourse that has a hole in it and, well, which was created by the very hands of nature. It is also generally associated with the ability to see fairies by looking through the hole, an association we also see in the act of seeing through keyholes in search of visions and occult knowledge of a divinatory character. According to traditional folk magic, the naturally hollowed stone must be found by the individual, never purchased, gifted or exchanged for something else to be truly effective, right? Giving a hagstone brings luck and protection too. Some people say the stone is effective on its own, placed on a fireplace or a windowsill, and others claim that for it to be fully activated, it must be strung on a red thread or cord or string. It should then be hung on a prominent place in the house or carried with the person if it is for personal protection. Once again, I don't know what your geographical and cultural reality is, but here in Portugal it is still possible to see these stones hanging along or under the windows, in houses, in coastal areas mostly, serving as protection for fishermen and sailors when they are at sea. Maybe it is something conscious, or maybe not, or maybe it has become a more decorative habit, but it's curious that some things are maintained to a certain extent. In folklore, phallus-shaped stones have a force of fertility, fecundity and protection, and any phallic-shaped stone is used to reproduce good harvests when they are buried in the middle of the plantation. It is no coincidence that many farmers across Europe continued to cultivate around ancient menhirs, standing stones, to maintain the fertility of their fields and crops. It is also interesting to see that, as an archaeologist, I do remember well this ancestral act of burying a spherical stone shaped like an egg and burying it next to a menhir, to a standing stone, a practice of burying polished stones that once served as a utensil to crush cereals to make flour in the shape of an egg that recalls this ancestral myth of the egg as a source of life and creation, and burying it next to a fertility monument. A practice that we see from the Neolithic until more or less the 19th century in some places in Europe, of course. We have many examples of a belief that stones absorb various types of energy determined by the location where they are or by those who have touched or used them in some way, whether people, animals or others. And speaking of megalithic monuments, I find it quite interesting, not only as an archaeologist, that in popular culture, in folklore culture, there are always many legends surrounding megalithic monuments. And in fact, many of these legends point to fertility cults that remained in the memory of local human communities over the centuries. Previously, I had already spoken to you about the act of circumambulation, right? The act of moving around a sacred object, statue or monument, which is often done in several religious beliefs, but also in traditional folk magic. Going around a specific building or monument understood to be sacred in some way, sometimes counterclockwise, in acts of divination, but also to receive magical power, or to contact with some entity, or to obtain a specific power or energy. I don't know if it is common where you live, but for example, in my country, again, it is still common for a priest from a church or in a town or a village in a rural areas to make a procession with the locals and go around a megalithic monument, usually carrying the Virgin Mary around it, around the monument, to bring prosperity but also fertility to the community. This act is actually ancestral. Despite changing religious beliefs, certain customs and beliefs are maintained, and these behaviors continue to be done, to a certain extent, obviously. The fact of going around with the Virgin Mary recalls the very goddesses and magic women and that were associated with these monuments and with fertility and prosperity. Despite the change of religion and religious figures, it is maintained a certain goddess procession in order to promote fertility within the human community. There continues to be this association between megalithic monuments related to the ancient fertility cults and the cult of the dead, in which, in a very intricate way, the dead were also generally associated to fertility, something that has already been mentioned here many times before on other videos. It is no coincidence that in many European megalithic monuments, couples also continue to sit or lie on them and have sexual intercourse to promote fertility and receive this blessing from the place itself and from these stones when they want to have children. These stones, whether megalithic monuments or heaps of stones made by nature, are part of the cognitive animistic landscape, and even today, in one way or another, they are still somewhat worshipped in Europe by many cultures and with their own folklore and rites. They are linked to pagan goddesses and witch legends. In fact, again, as an archaeologist, it is very useful to understand local folklore, as it often holds interesting associations that date back to the pre-Christian past and the cults and meanings that were engraved on the stones. I've given a good example in here, not in here, it was actually at my Instagram, further north in my country at Ponte da Barca, Viana do Castelo, in Portugal, the so-called Penedo do Encanto. The best translation I can give you is Boulder of Enchantment, or also known as Sete Cabeças, 7 heads. Here are the motifs engraved on the rock after the application of the bichromatic. In the past 10 years or so, we archaeologists, on an interdisciplinary work alongside with other professionals of the human social sciences, have been studying the prehistoric rock art and the origins of the cup, ring and spiral markings and motifs. Even though this is a widespread phenomenon all across Europe, there are places that present an earlier development, and we have come to the conclusion that this was an artistic current from the Atlantic spreading from south to the north, or so it seems. The oldest findings are from Portugal, northern West Spain, Brittany, the British Isles, especially Orkney Island, and Western Norway, of course. There's a clear development and spreading of this prehistoric art along the Atlantic from south to the north. Usually this art is noticeable during the Neolithic. However, the Portuguese example I'm sharing with you in here, somewhere on the screen, is from an earlier period, not yet determined, which shows one of the earliest cases and possible places of origins. The Penedo do Encanto demonstrates a monumental composition of geometric symbolic nature. The center of the composition is dominated by an idealiform female figure. The figure has a similar representation according to the scheme of the later menhir statues, thus representing the head, the breasts, and the belly of the feminine figure. In 7 surrounding stones or rocks, there are also engravings made up of lattices, concentric circles, and dimples or cup marks. This monument was dated before the Neolithic, probably as early as the Mesolithic, but still the subject of study and yet to be determined, but clearly one of the oldest in Europe. But the point here is that local folklore, to this day, we can literally ask people about it. These rocks with such engravings are still associated with legends of goddesses, ancestral feminine magical figures, witches, enchanted women and whatnot, etc. and so on and so forth. It is fascinating how some ancestral beliefs remain and are somewhat preserved within folklore. Many of these stones, whether megalithic monuments, stones with prehistoric engravings, or piles of stones or rocks, are often called fairy houses or understood as dwellings of spiritual beings or local entities. Not coincidentally, in animist cultures and indigenous beliefs that have survived to this day, of course, such monuments and heaps of stones created by nature are still understood as dwellings of some divinity, fairies, spirits of all sorts, ancestors, and other entities. Even today, many Catholic religious pilgrimage routes follow the ancient routes that lead to such monuments, or in one way or another, the act of circumambulation around pre-Christian sacred sites continues to exist. As before, still today, many of us continue to leave offerings in these places, and people also, unfortunately, remove stones from these places to take with them. Not only as an archaeologist, but also as a tourist and as a pagan, I almost always find offerings that someone left in these places or traces of ritual acts, even today, still. Not only done by modern pagans, obviously, but also because these are practices that have become rooted in traditional folklore, and people still go to these places to pray, leave offerings, receive some benefits, something beneficial to their lives. Folklore is living tradition. It is the survival of memory. Traditional folk magic, witchcraft, is a set of pragmatic behaviors that preserve memory in a syncretism between the past and present to actively manifest something that helps human communities to thrive, to survive, and to make life more bearable through acts of magic. So, various amulets and talismans were and have been made from natural objects and used in folk magic to protect both the home and the individual. And one of the most popular and readily available were different types of stones. Perhaps more difficult, of course, to find stones like the ones we saw previously, such as hag stones or witch's stone, but it is easier, I think fairly easy, to find stones in general than other materials as durable as stone, of course. And another popular charm is the so-called fairy bread, or fairy loaves, or witch bread, or witch loaves, fossilized sea urchins kept on the earth to prevent witchcraft from ruining the bread being baked, or used as a charm to ensure you would never be short of bread. This is a naturally fossilized sea urchin that looks very much like those old breads we used to make, right? They were considered breads that had been baked by the fairy folk and lost behind or left behind, but containing all the fae folk's luck in them. They were highly sought after for their protective properties and polished and placed on the shelf over the fireplace or outside the windowsill as well. And they ensured the protection of the house against witchcraft, against poverty, famine, and storms. Fairy breads, however, could bring luck to anyone who found one and kept it. And there is, of course, an honorable mention, the bezoar, a concretion, of course, from the digestive system of animals. The stones that form in the intestines of animals who chew the cud, particularly goats. It's a famous object for protection against poisoning. And speaking of that, another honorable mention is the toad stone, which is a mythical stone or gem that was thought to be found in the head of a toad. Another antidote to poison, which are actually fossilized teeth of Chinchia, an extinct ray-finned fish from the Jurassic or Cretaceous periods. Sadly, as you might imagine, countless frogs and toads have been killed in these situations, in search for these mythical stones that, of course, such animals don't have. The real ones are, as previously said, fossilized teeth of a fish. But I thought you would find these curious. Anyway, well, dear friends, this is it. I hope you have found this subject interesting and to your liking, hopefully. and may some useful knowledge come out of this. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you on the next video. And as always, thank you for today. Until we meet again, my dear friends.